Hey all, how's it going? I'm starting my interview series this month with the great Erik Alvar here. Erik is a member of Nefesh Mountain and has played with Michael Daves, Rebecca Fraizer, Billy Strings, and Jim Hurst Trio. Excellent bass player, good friend of mine, based in Brooklyn, New York. As you can see, he's here in person. Some of these interviews going forward are going to be conducted online because I'm trying to get different bass players of my generation from around the country and eventually the world who are involved in the acoustic music scene, because I feel like there's so many great players around my age that I would love for people to meet. So, Erik, thanks so much for being here, man.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, man. And yeah, first question, just like tell us about how you first got started playing bass and your story there.
Yeah, so I wanted to be a mandolin player, actually.
Nice.
My dad,
Classic, like bass player not playing bass to begin with.
exactly. My dad played in like a bluegrass Americana folk band when I was probably around 8 or 9, and they're a mandolin player. I really liked the sound, and I was like, all right, I want to play mandolin. The mandolin teacher or the player was very keen on like, hey, don't buy a cheap mandolin. It's not like a guitar. It's going to be hard to play. He's going to hate it. And so they're like, well, take violin in school. It's free. If you like it, we'll buy you a mandolin. And so, yeah, I took violin for half a year and I liked it. They bought me a mandolin. But as soon as I got back to school, this is like 5th grade, the bass player had dropped out. And I think, or they kicked her out. She dropped the bass quite a few times.
Oh, like physically dropped the bass.
Physically dropped the bass,
Oh, no.
yes. I think one of them might have broken. I can't remember. But anyways, the teacher walks around the room. She's like, everybody put up your left hand. So we all put up our left hand. She walks down. She's like, all right, you're the new bass player. I was like, why? She's like, you have the biggest hands. Also, what car does your mom drive? I'm like, station wagon. She's like, okay, you're the bass player.
Yes.
So I did
Amazing.
that. Played bass in classical through high school.
Mm-hmm.
Played mandolin took lessons, did festivals, went to mandolin symposium, went to Kaufman camp on mandolin.
Right. So this is like you're playing bass in a classical environment at school, but playing mandolin more in the world we know,
Yep.
bluegrass acoustic music.
Yeah. Stopped playing bass senior year of high school. Was going to Florida State for commercial music. Got into Florida State. The commercial music program was cool. The jazz program was like, oh, you'll just be like one of our guitar players. You'll be on mandolin because you had to have a primary instrument. And I have a 5-string solid body Stumac mandolin with a B bender on the A string. And so that was what I played in my high school jazz band, in my big band.
Oh, that's so cool.
And got to, I think, 3 weeks before my audition. I'd already been accepted to Florida State. And the admissions from the School of Music was like, we're not going to let you play mandolin. What else do you play? It's like, I play bass. They're like, cool, you're auditioning on jazz bass. You have 3 weeks.
So at this time, like before this audition, had you played jazz before on bass or on any instrument?
I did some electric bass in the jazz band when the bass player couldn't make it.
That makes sense.
Just reading, like no jazz language or upright on jazz, but just mandolin. Yeah, it was interesting. And so I took one bass lesson
Before this audition.
Yeah, one jazz bass lesson.
Wow.
And I got to the audition, and it was like a 25-minute audition, and 20 minutes of that audition were, first they made me get out the bass, and I played some Simandl or some Capuzzi sonata or concerto or something.
For those who aren't familiar, these are both great bass pedagogues and players of the instrument more in the classical world, real textbook stuff.
Yeah. And so they're like, okay, you can play bass. Can you play jazz? And so I took out the mandolin, and there was a pianist and a bass player. Who was that? I think it was never mind. It was a different bass player. I was thinking it was Barry Stevenson, who's actually a New York City bass player.
Oh yeah,
but he was outside the room. I remember him being there. So anyway, so then 20 minutes of the audition was just like jamming with the jazz trio on mandolin, and they're like, okay, you can play jazz. And they gave me a jazz scholarship. It was really crazy.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow, man. So they knew you could play jazz like on a different instrument. You had that language, you had the understanding of the music, and you could play bass. Just kind of melding the two together when you got to school.
Yep, exactly.
So I assume when you got to school, you started playing more bass, like, in the jazz setting. got more comfortable with that and started, working on learning different tracks, different solos, different heads. I met different melodies. So then from there, like how did you come to the acoustic music world on the bass? Was it through anything at school, or was it just through an outside group? Like, tell us that story, because you hadn't even played, any acoustic music or bluegrass music on the bass yet.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I'd done some singer-songwriter stuff with like friends in high school, friends, whatever. And then when I got to Tallahassee, there's just an amazing music scene, folk scene, bluegrass, even some great teachers, some great organizations. And then Swanee Spring Fest and Swanee Mag Fest were right down the street in Live Oak. And so I was going to that. I mean, I'd been going to that since I was like 10, but now as a bass player, it was like, oh, we need you in our circle.
Right. And you grew up in Florida as well. Yeah. Right. So you come to these festivals and you have a bass with you now. So everyone knows right out there, when you have your bass at a festival, there's like a jam circle and there's no bass player. You're going to be dragged into all sorts of different scenarios.
Yeah.
Some of which are going to be awesome, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And so through that, I think that first semester I met this dude, Grant Peoples, who's a singer-songwriter from Florida. And so I started recording with him because he knew me from the folk scene, the singer-songwriter scene, playing mandolin. He's like, oh, you're a bass player now. Okay, I need you for a session tomorrow.
Right.
I met him at like I think Larkin Poe was opening for, some big band. And I was like there to see Larkin Poe. It was really funny. But yeah, so I just started recording and touring with him that year. And then this sophomore year, I moved in with Aaron O'Rourke as my roommate. And he is one of the most insane mountain dulcimer players there is. I mean, just chromatic stuff, classical, jazz, his language, any of that on mountain dulcimer. And so we formed a trio. Cool. Yeah. And then started touring. We opened for the Kruger Brothers. We headlined some festivals around Florida. It was a really good time.
Nice, man. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And so from there, you continued to play bass through undergrad and eventually went to grad school.
Yep.
Right. And that was also in Florida, right?
Yeah. So in between that, I went from Florida State, finished up, and I was thinking I'd take a year off.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Then go back I was looking at musicology. I was looking at a few different things. So I moved to Nashville. Nice. I think I went up there for like 2 weeks, like that summer, and I was like, oh, I like it. Okay, I'll move here.
Cool. Yeah.
And so I moved to Nashville right after undergrad, and within 10 days, I had all these auditions with a lot of like pop country bands.
Got it. Nice.
Touring bands. They were just like, oh, cool, college bass player that can read and can.
Right. Yeah.
And through a Facebook post, I think it was something. I was like, hey, I'm new here. Like, I'm looking to play. I do this. I play jazz, classical, bluegrass, country, whatever. And the bass player for the Roys hit me up.
Oh,
and
cool.
I ended up with that gig 10 days into moving in Nashville.
That's awesome. See, that's a bass player story, moving to Nashville.
Yeah,
you don't have to cut your teeth quite as much as a fiddle player or guitar picker,
So yeah, I'm sleeping on my friend's futon in East Nashville in Inglewood, and I got that call. I auditioned for the couple country bands, and then I got that call, and they're like, meet us at the tour bus before we leave. So I drive up to Goodlettsville and get on the tour bus, and we jam. I learned a couple of their songs from their record, and I finished the thing, and I think I bowed like some fiddle tunes or something. They're like, what? This is a thing?
Yeah.
And because in the trad bluegrass world, that's not too much of a thing. And they were more trad bluegrass, old country. And so I got off the bus, met with the bass player, went home, and they offered me the gig. Like on my way home, they called me, and I get back to my friend's house, and he's like, how'd it go? I was like, they offered me the gig, and he just looks at me, he's like,
that's like awesome.
A Nashville guy that'd been there for like 20 years. He's like, this doesn't happen.
What did your friend play?
A guitar player.
Yeah. See, everyone. So that actually kind of is a good leeway into the next question I wanted to ask you, because you are like among, a lot of people in our generation are exploring like different sounds on the bass, and in large part thanks to like luminaries like Edgar Meyer and that whole school of thought. A lot of us have become inspired to take the bass in new directions and play, more stuff that you hadn't heard before on the bass, fiddling, like literally fiddling tunes with the bow. It's all the stuff we've worked on this Patreon page. How did you get into that? What was your discovery noticing, oh, wow, like people are doing some really advanced stuff on the bass that might be kind of new and a lot of people, especially the trad people, haven't heard before. Like, how did you find this music on the bass?
Yeah. I think most of it was actually just converting all the tunes I knew on mandolin to bass.
Right,
like
you already knew all those melodies. Yeah,
exactly. Sense. How do I make this happen? When I get a solo, like what am I going to do? For the fast stuff, I definitely preferred the bow. It just for me, I was like, it's just a little clearer maybe.
I agree with that for sure. It's hard for me, the pizzicato. If I were to play fast, I really go into like the horizontal electric bass mode, like Christian McBride mode.
Yep.
I feel like you can get much more articulation on the eighth notes, and
exactly.
But really the bow is clearer, I think, for faster stuff too.
Yeah, and I think then the other thing was the Aaron O'Rourke Trio, which was mountain dulcimer, fiddle, and bass. And so it was really more of a chamber group than it was a string band. We were very heavily arrangements, very heavily like chord substitutions, and I was bowing maybe 40% of the show, just with the violin player working out harmonies. And I was even doing double stops and her doing double stops. So we'd have full chords behind the dulcimer.
It's kind of like, it's those scenarios, and you see like someone like Edgar Meyer really putting themselves in a scenario where it's like, oh, it's bass and mandolin or it's bass and banjo. Like the bass becomes an instrument that needs to fill out that middle range more, right? So it's not so much like you're supporting a guitar player, but it's something where like you are filling that area, and that's cool. Like you put yourself in a scenario where the bass needed to be interpreted differently, and the instrumentation was kind of unique, right? So you could kind of do something new.
Yep. And then also I was taking classical bass lessons as well with Melanie Punter, who was she was a New York City bass player for a long time, but she was an amazing bass player, bass professor. So I did 3 or 4 semesters with her. And so it was kind of like, all right, I need to warm up. Let's do D major today. Okay, what fiddle tunes can I play in D major? And that was my warm up, which I know a lot of people are doing now, which is cool.
Right. Yeah. And again, but when you say a lot of people, like, do you know that you might be more aware of this than me even, like, what is the trend among like a more conservatory bass, studio? Are a lot of people interested in these fiddle tunes and folk music and conservatories now, or more so than before, obviously?
Yeah, I'd say definitely more so than before. I don't know particularly too much about the classical stuff, because that world, it is also, when I did my master's, I did my master's in classical bass at University of Florida. And that was really, 5-6 hours a day of shedding just the classical repertoire. Like I had to quit a band and just practice so I can get through that final recital.
Yeah. So it's like you really have to focus on like, new direction for now.
Yep.
Playing classical music, folk music off to the side a little bit.
Yeah.
But all those chops definitely like made their way in. That's the thing.
Yeah, definitely.
It's all music at the end of the day. So anything you do, it's cool that you did a jazz undergrad and a classical graduate, and now kind of are more existing in the acoustic music world. You're kind of getting a taste of everything, So after you took the year off in Nashville, played some gigs, you came back to grad school.
The year turned into 4 years, I think 4.
Oh, wow. So 4 years in between undergrad and grad school.
Yeah, I hopped around with a bunch of bands, toured full time, 200 days a year for 4 years.
More than I've ever done. That's a lot of days a year.
Yeah, and then looking at grad programs, I was still looking at musicology. Just like I wanted to get my master's just so I could. The plan then was like to teach college level courses, and then out of just randomly getting coffee with my friend in East Nashville on Fatherland, whatever that place was, getting coffee one morning, and this drummer walks in, and he's like, we were just talking to my friend, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm just finishing up my master's program at University of Florida, and they're looking for a bass player to teach. They want a Nashville touring bass player. And my friend's like, this guy's from Florida. He's looking to go to grad school. Oh, yeah. And so that conversation turned into just the connection to the jazz program at the University of Florida. And I called them up, and I was on tour with I think like 3 weeks later. So I went down there and then rented a car and just like went to the university, and they're like, yeah, we want a Nashville touring bass player to teach the undergrad jazz program. So I was teaching jazz history, jazz theory, jazz improv, small ensembles and things. And but it was fun because I like the way this program works, hiring touring musicians with the experience, because a lot of music programs tend to take their graduate assistants right out of undergrad.
No experience in the field.
They're like, all right, they're great, they've passed, now they can teach it. But this one was very cool. Like, well, how did you get that touring gig? What do you do about getting on the road, and how do you land an audition? Networking, things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you were studying classical bass in the grad program.
Yes.
And teaching jazz.
Yeah.
In undergrad, because you were already kind of existing in these multiple worlds.
Yeah. The deal was like, hey, we need you as a jazz assistant, but you can get whatever masters you want.
Right. That's super enticing, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Free masters was the way to go. And I've learned this, that I could have done this exact same thing at other universities that were actually looking for bass graduate assistants. So it's like, if you can get it, there are ways to go to like grad school for free.
That's cool. I have to pick your brain on that. I only have the undergrad from Berkeley, so maybe I'll follow in Eric's footsteps. Who knows? But cool. So you went to the grad program at University of Florida.
Yep.
Right. Where's that, by the way? What town?
That's Gainesville.
Gainesville. Gotcha. Cool. So you went there, and did you head right back to Nashville when you were done? Did you come to New York? I know you kind of have been back and forth a little bit.
Yeah. So when I got to University of Florida, I was still touring with the Jim Hurst Trio. And so that was mostly weekend runs. And so like 2 weekends a month, I'd fly out on like Thursday night from Orlando or Jacksonville, and then play Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, fly back to Gainesville on Sunday or Monday morning even. Mm-hmm. And so I was doing that for, I think, the whole first year. And then that summer I went back to Nashville and I toured with Jim again. And then I got back to that third semester, and I remember sitting in a lesson with my professor, and he was like, yeah, you're not getting enough done.
That's funny.
It was, hey, let me be real with you. You sound great, but you're not getting enough time chatting, which was the thing. And he was like, you're going to have to quit the band, or you're not going to pass your jury. And then you're going to have to either take another semester and be like, all right, you're not getting it. Yeah, he was it was a good time.
What happened?
I played with Jim a couple more months, and then I gave my notice, and I was like, if I need to finish this master's degree.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so after that, it was pretty much like weekends instead of touring or even playing shows. I barely played shows in Gainesville too. Was just like going straight to the practice room at like 8 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday and just being there all day.
Dedication, folks. That's what it takes.
It's a classical bass is hard.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Right. So you decided to finish the master's, and then when you completed it,
yep.
Where'd you head next?
Yeah, I pretty much packed up and I headed here. Yeah, I was looking at Nashville. I didn't want to tour the 200 days a year that I did in Nashville.
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, for those who don't know, like, Nashville's kind of the place you go if you're, freelancer looking for touring work. So many bands out of there. New York is more of a localized scene, although there are some touring opportunities as well.
Yeah. So I was looking to Austin, Texas. I was looking at Seattle, Portland. I mean, they have good, strong music unions for even like for theater stuff.
Right, local work.
Denver, and I think I came up here for a week. I had known a bunch of like Broadway people.
Gotcha.
I did one Broadway tour, and I knew a bunch of Broadway people. I knew some classical people. And I came up here for a week and kind of just like followed some bass players around, like from gig to gig. It was like, how do you do this? How do you get on the subway? How do you carry up to Midtown? Things like that. I didn't understand like how you could get around with a bass.
Yeah. It's tough.
So I bought my bass buggy and I moved here, and I was all good.
Nice, man. And so you've been here since then?
Yeah, about four years.
Nice, man.
Yep.
So that's great. So want to move a little bit into some musical concepts. This is a question I'm probably going to ask almost everyone who comes on the interview. When you're on stage, specifically with like an acoustic group, what are you listening for as a bass player? Like, where are your ears gravitating towards? There's so much happening like this. You got your rhythm section, lead players, vocals. What's the primary thing you're listening for? And how much are you focusing on what you're playing versus what other people are playing? Kind of two separate questions. But.
Yeah. I think first off, I'm just trying to, whatever the song starts at, I have to decide, and playing with certain bands, it's different with every band, but I have to decide or did we start it too slow? Are we going to have to like get up to the tempo we want it to be for the rest of the song? And then initially just getting that tempo set and locked. And I try to stay as close to that as possible. And then I'm listening to, whether it's a bluegrass band, say like the mandolin and the fiddle player, who's chopping when, how is that feel changing the feel of the band? Right,
because sometimes when the mandolin player takes leads, the fiddle player kind of takes over and chops. Sometimes they do it together. Yep. Depends on the sound of the band. But that backbeat is like a really essential part of what you listen for. Yeah, to stay locked in.
Yeah. So generally I'm listening to that. I've been more in tune with the vocals recently, hearing like the vocal timing, which is something I definitely paid a little bit of attention to, but I was always more locked in on the instruments. And now I'm really tuning into how the singer is like directing the time as well.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And I think a lot about how like moments where you want to fill or add something into your line, like I try to link that up with the vocal a lot of the time, you know, because there's a lot of like rhythmic information the vocal gives that you can support, or you can fill in between, you know, like talk about supportive fills and spatial fills kind of being two separate things. But the vocal is super important, but probably not quite as important as like a backbeat mandolin or fiddle chop. So you'd say those are the primary things.
Yeah,
for sure. Very cool, man.
Yeah.
Another question about what you're playing. What is your favorite bass to play in an acoustic music setting, and what strings you have on that? What's your setup like?
Yeah, so I have this 54K, which I bought in high school actually, and it's been my main bass since then. I've had it slightly redone. It's got the fingerboard was thickened, and so it's more like a real classical bass rather than a K, which have notoriously thin necks.
Right.
They hurt my hands for being that thin.
Yeah, they're like electric basses.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how thin they are. So I've had that thickened quite a bit. I've had an extra layer put on the top because the top sunk a little bit, like a lot of plywood basses do, and so the top was taken off. An extra layer added to under the treble foot from the bass bar around. And I guess it's got carbon fiber in the neck now. Reshaped the neck a little bit, reshaped the fingerboard, raised the bridge up. So it's more like a Germany sounding bass. Like you can bow it a lot better than most Ks. And currently I used to use, in Nashville, I used D'Addario Zyx because I would get them for free and they were great.
Right. D'Addario's very generous with their strings.
So touring full time with the bands I was in, they were sending me some, and I loved them. They were great. But since getting out of that world, I have to buy my own strings again. And I have, on this bass, I have Spiracores that are currently probably about 5 years old.
It's halfway through their life.
Yeah, and I love the sound. It is getting, I feel like they're not intonating quite as well. It's harder to lock into a note. So I will have to replace them, but I'm scared to replace them.
Right, but most likely a new set of Spiracores.
Yep, Spiracore lights. And
lights.
I've used lights on all my strings. I had Ava Pratzis on my classical bass,
cool.
Which I really liked. But these generally, and I have a Chadwick folding bass. I use the Spiracore mediums on that bass.
Easier to do they set easier when you set the bass up?
I think so.
The middles, yeah. Because I have a removable neck bass, so the neck fully comes off, and I use the middle gauge Spiracores too because they do set really quickly when you set your bass up.
Yeah.
But the K is your go-to.
K is the go-to.
If you have a bluegrass gig here in New York, you're gonna pull that out and bring it. Haul it on the subway.
Yep. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I've probably re-glued every seam on this bass at some point. And it sounds great. I've had a classical bass that's actually for sale. I had a really nice Solano orchestra bass with a C extension. Pretty big body, very deep. And I would use that for recording sessions and stuff, but it just didn't have that like American bluegrass or jazz or country sound.
Right. Yeah. That's like, I mean, the beautiful thing about uprights is they're all so different, and there's no like fixed size either, you know, like violins and cellos typically have a bit more of a fixed way they're built. Basses are like, they're all so different. So you got to like find different ones for different styles, you know, a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, last question. Where can people find you and get in touch with you? Website or Instagram or anything like that?
Yeah, I think Instagram, I post most of my gigs, stories. Facebook, I'm much slower on nowadays. And then I have a website, erikalvar.com.
I'll drop those in the comments below the video too, everyone.
I know there's some videos. It's pretty out of date, but I'll update that eventually.
Cool. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat, Erik.
Of course.
And welcome to the interview series, y'all.
Yeah.
This is going to be the way it goes, and you're going to see some Skype recordings. Unfortunately, I can't get everyone in person, but I'm really excited to share all these great bass players of our generation with you all. And thanks for watching.
Cool.
Thanks, man.